To enforce this policy of wanton destruction, they have a personal army of trained murderers.
World War II was the world's largest armed conflict with an estimated 50 million civilian and military deaths. It lasted 6 years, which marked a period of horrible death alongside innovation and perseverance. In a period of just 6 years, there were leaps and bounds in many areas of technology like medicine, nutrition, and materials. But how did this technological development affect warfare and battle in World War II? Technological development influenced warfare and battle tactics through advances in air and armored capabilities, the development of different fighting tactics and styles, and advances in incendiary and nuclear weaponry. Some of the most major influences of technology were the widespread and effective use of air and armored forces in World War II. One of the most notable things about World War II was a newfound reliance on strong air forces. This would cue the rise of the strategic bomber. Advances in load capacity allowed large planes to destroy strategic locations behind enemy lines. A famous plane, the American Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, could hold 10 people and crippled German industrial production. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress dropped incendiary bombs and dropped the atomic bombs in Japan. For their time, they were the epitome of aerial warfare. They had pressurized crew compartments, remote-controlled turrets, and better range, carrying load, and maximum altitude than the other planes of the age. These planes would also be armed with another new technology, bomb sights. The use of bomb sights made high-altitude daylight bombing feasible by accounting for and calculating wind, plane altitude, speed, air resistance, bomb ballistics, and the altitude of the target. Before World War II, bombs were dropped by hand and more psychological than physical. During the war, the Sperry, Norden, and Lofty 7 models were the most common, and used to bomb civilian production sites most often. To combat this ability to cripple industrial production, better fighter technologies arose. To intercept a threat from above, one needs to reach them and gun them down. This required new technologies to be developed, increasing airplane speed. Due to the constraints of physics and fluid resistance, propellers on planes don't function well at speeds nearing 500 miles per hour. This means one can't just have propellers go faster, some other new idea had to be thought of. One of the new innovations and strategies of war would then be born from German technological development. The Germans made the jet engine, which compressed air and fuel and controlled explosions to create thrust.
Because the Messerschmitt jet fighter allowed for a proper center of gravity through a slightly swept wing design.
One notable example would be the Me-262 fighter, which had 2 jet engines and a maximum speed of 550 miles per hour, almost 100 miles per hour faster than the Allied planes.
These new prototypes fell under the label Messerschmitt 262, or the Me-262. The body was manufactured with 4 Mk108 30mm cannon mounted in the nose to aid in its role as an interceptor.
On the ground, AFVs, also known as armored fighting vehicles, became essential in combined arms assaults. Perhaps the most famous of such, the German panzers of the Entwicklung class, were incredibly advanced. One such as the Panzer IV heavy tank would have a 75mm gun and a 7.92mm machine gun, with 5 crew and combines 24 tons in weight. In opposition, Allied forces would develop their own AFV technologies, which resulted in the M4 Sherman medium tank from the United States and the T-34 from the Soviet Union. An example of the importance of tanks was the British Matilda II tanks under General Montgomery in the North Africa campaign. Another example would be over 500 Soviet T-34s defending in the Battle of Stalingrad. Reliance on these armored and air forces and combined forces was in stark contrast to the stale infantry wars of the past. The use of these newfound forces culminated in a tactic called lightning warfare, or blitzkrieg, used by the Germans. Blitzkrieg is a tactic designed to create disorganization among enemy forces through the use of mobile forces. It was utilized to avoid the stalemates and wars of attrition that are prevalent in the First World War by exploiting the combined arms advancements. It combines locally concentrated firepower and quick air movement with fast armor and troops. In this way, internal combustion engines combined with modern communications technology could organize large formations moving on tracks and wheels. Its strategy could rupture an enemy's front and disorganize its rear so that countermeasures would be destroyed. It was a new efficient form of maneuver warfare which could break up, encircle, or entirely bypass forces. In the April and May of 1940, the tactic was used by Germany so effectively that in a period of just 6 weeks, they took the four nations of France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Denmark. In 1941, Germany was able to threaten the Soviet capital of Moscow within 6 months of adopting the strategy on the Eastern Front. New complex maneuvers and tactics required new forms of organization, which was one of the most overlooked yet most important influences that technology had on World War II. This focus led to new battle tactics partnered with operations research. Operations research was the field of research devoted to the simple question, how can we do more with what we have, rather than the how can we make more and make better attitude adopted by developmental research. A classic example of operations research in wartime was the British Royal Air Force hunting German U-boats in the ocean. U-boats were notoriously hard to detect due to their ability to submerge. So operations research divisions would mathematically create optimal search paths and flight times for pilots scouting above the ocean. This idea of making war an efficient matter quickly spread through many aspects of the war. Anything from dropping bombs in time strategic manners to tracking increasing production of factories would be processed and made into an efficient system. Operations research combined with new radar technologies were used to create defensive strategies from German blitzkrieg. One such example was the British Chain Home System, a network of early warning radar with a range of 185 miles. Its most famous use was intercepting bombers in the Battle of Britain. As is with total war, militaries don't only target other militaries, they target civilians. While not new, psychological warfare had never been pursued on such large of a scale as in World War II. Hitler's Nazi Germany would use huge amounts of propaganda. The place of the artillery barrage as a preparation for an infantry attack will in the future be taken by revolutionary propaganda. Its task is to break down the enemy psychologically before the armies begin to function at all. Quote, Adolf Hitler. As the British Chiefs of Staffs would put it, in total war, propaganda is as much a military weapon as any of the three established services. In response to German propaganda, Britain created the Ministry of Information, which focused on making psychological warfare into a science. They studied the vulnerabilities of the human mind, and as the scientific development paid off, they created many subdivisions for different aspects of the counterattack on German propaganda. Such works would either incite or manipulate individual fears and focus how the stress of war could be increased systematically. One such branch of the Ministry of Information, the PWE, or Political Warfare Executive, would actually recruit psychologists to work on and research new psychological weapons. The Ministry of Information would be responsible for one of the most famous wartime motivation posters of all time, "Keep calm and carry on." On the other side, however, the ministry would seek to exploit pain, cold, hunger, thirst, fatigue, boredom, and loneliness to create guilt, a lessening of group identification, withdrawal of physical emotional investment, refusal to fight, or the desire to go AWOL entirely. Aside from the development of conventional arms-shaping warfare, new forms of weapons were used to cause massive destruction. The most famous and most obvious of these would be the development of nuclear weapons in the Manhattan Project. In the United States alone, $2 billion were spent on making the bombs, and it employed a total of 120,000 people, though only a small amount knew the true nature of what they were making. On July 16th, the Manhattan Project reached fruition. The 1945 Trinity test could be seen from 200 miles away, and the cloud reached 40,000 feet. On August 6, 1945, Enola Gay, a B-29 superfortress, dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 70,000 Japanese were killed. 100,000 died from burns and radiation sickness afterwards. On August 9, 1945, Nagasaki was bombed, killing instantly 80,000. 5 days later, Japan surrendered on August 14th. The nuclear bombs were some of the many hugely destructive weapons used in World War II, and perhaps the most well known. However, firebombs were the weapon that caused the most damage. Unfortunately, most of these attacks affected civilians in an effort to disrupt production. It also diverted forces to firefighting and recovery instead of directly opposing the opposition. In Japan, under the direction of American Commander Curtis LeMay, napalm bombs were utilized on February 23, 1945. 100 American B-29s destroyed an entire square mile of Tokyo, a very dense city. Tokyo was especially susceptible to these incendiary attacks, as much of the city was made of flammable material like wood or paper. On March 10th, the attacks continued with renewed force from the success of the first. Over 330 B-29s demolished over 16 square miles of Tokyo, dropping over 1,700 tons of explosives and incendiary bombs. Over 100,000 died from the first two attacks. More attacks would later continue to devastate Tokyo and other dense cities in Japan. Firebombs in Germany were another large technological development. Combining detonation and combustion were essential for the attacks on Germany, as they could not rely so heavily on the fire spreading on its own. In the German city of Hamburg, the British Royal Air Force alone sent 3,000 bombers on 4 raids, dropping 9,000 tons of bombs. It killed more than 45,000 people and left, by some accounts, more than 60% of the city in ruins. Almost 1 million of these people would be homeless by these attacks. In Dresden, 1,478 tons of high explosives and 1,182 tons of incendiary bombs were dropped by 796 Royal Air Force bombers in one attack. Estimates of those killed vary from 35,000 to 135,000, due partly because of the recent influx in refugees in Dresden at the time. The United States sent between 317 and 527 bombers to continue on February 14th in another attack. Accounts say that it created a self-sustaining firestorm that burned over 1,500 degrees. The end result was that of 28,410 houses in central Dresden, 24,866 were destroyed. Over 15 square kilometers were totally demolished in the attack. Some argue, however, that attributing many actions and effects to solely technology is dramatically oversimplifying an issue. The nuclear bombs dropped in Japan certainly impacted their decision to surrender, but however, the Soviet Union declared war a few days before they surrendered also, perhaps making this the final straw. Tokyo had also been under massive bombing for months, taking a massive toll on production. The American naval fleet was responsible for taking many islands from previous Japanese control. What was attributed to the set of 2 bombs is ultimately the culmination of many smaller actions and decisions. The war as a whole was shaped and developed along with technology. Total war led to armored and air forces increasing massively and creating new sciences to manage and use these. The new destructive power also influenced the war, taking the target off military opposition and instead targeting civilians behind the effort. The technology used and created in the war can be seen around us today, along with the lasting impacts of their usage. While the war was horrible, the technologies today have also helped progress immense amounts. While the war was horrible, the technologies today also have their roots in immense amounts of progress. In your pocket, your phone, even the device playing this video, or the building you are probably sitting in, we can trace the links of their wiring, materials, or conception to World War II developments. These ideas and technologies didn't just impact the years of war, they held lasting impact for years to come. Our world today is inextricably linked to the technology developed to win a war almost 70 years ago.